This conference will now be recorded.
And I'll hand you over to Finola.
Excellent. So I'm going to say hello to everybody. Obviously, I'm Finola, and I'm going to start the Research Bites Creating Deep Learning webinar for you now. And as we go through, as Jane mentioned, if there are any questions, then please just pop them in the chat. Jane will be monitoring that, and she'll interrupt me to ask the questions if she can't answer it directly in the chat. So for those of you who don't know us, we are Finola and Jane. We are Impact Wales. There's just the two of us, and we are supporting schools across the UK and these days across the world as well, which is fantastic. We're both former teachers. Jane is a former maths teacher, secondary maths teacher, and she went right up to senior leadership in school. I'm a former English teacher, and I've taught 6-year-olds right through to A-level, to practically to adults. And I've had senior leadership posts both inside and outside school. So I've had a slightly different experience than Jane. And we've got far too much experience between you. I won't mention that number. So what is this session about? Today we're going to look at using a single sketchnote, one of our sketchnote resources, to lead professional learning. So we're giving you a feel for how you can use our sketchnotes to actually lead professional learning with your colleagues. And all of our sketchnotes are available on our website. You can access them for free if you want to. So after the session today, please feel free to go to our website and have a look at them. Today's session hopefully will be an example, a model of cognitive load theory in practice. So we're going to be very careful about how much we load you cognitively, and we're going to make sure that we are in a position where you've got plenty of working memory, plenty of processing space to think about what we're asking you to think about. And the focus today is going to be about creating deep learning. So during the session, this is all very odd from a presenter point of view because I can't actually see any of you at the moment. I'm just talking to my presentation screen, but I'm going to turn my camera off because research shows that there's no benefit to having the camera on in terms of learning, and in fact it might be distracting for listeners. So I'm going to turn my camera off. If we have any questions come up that need a sort of human connection, I'll turn it back on again. Okay, so let's get started. So you should have had the sketch note sent to you, the deep learning sketch note. And as Jane said, that it will be sent to you afterwards if you need it. It'll be in the pack as well. You can download it from our website. But this will serve as an aid memoir for you. Everything that we're going to talk about is encapsulated in this single sketch note, this single page. And we're going to go through it in a little bit more detail today. Okay, all of this is based on the research. So the research is Craig and Lockhart 1972, the levels of processing, a framework for memory research, and also Kirshner-Hendrick's recent book, How Learning Happens. I think it's, if I'm right, it is chapter 2. It might be chapter 1, I'm not sure, I'll have to go and check after the presentation, but it's one of the first 2 chapters that focuses specifically on Craig and Lockhart's research. So that's where it comes from today. So what we're going to do is we're going to think specifically about deep learning to start with. And we're going to model for you as well how you might do this with colleagues. So we're going to ask you to actually take part in some deep learning. So if we're starting with the idea of learning being an analysis, a very deep analysis, what does that actually mean in reality? So let me give you an example. If I show you the number 999, just have a think about it now. What are the images, the connections, what pops up into your head when you think of the number 999? And for those of you who are outside the UK, this is the emergency number in the UK. But just have a think about all of the connections, all of the things that pop into your mind when you think about 999. Add them to the chat. Let's have a look at what you're thinking of. Just going to pause for a second whilst you do that. Okay, so we've got ambulance, police, ambulance, fire engine. I think of the Hill Street Blues theme tune. I also think of the neighbour down the street who used to have an ambulance come to their house on a regular basis. Problems, flashing lights, blues and twos. That's something from The Bill. I remember the theme tune of The Bill. Okay, so you get the idea. There's lots and lots of connections going on for people. And those connections, lots of them will be common. So lots of those connections will come on, but some of them are really specific to you. Like I'm talking about my neighbour who lives down the road, who used to have the ambulance out to her on a regular basis. So this is what deep analysis is. It's making connections, because every time you take some new learning, or you're thinking about deepening your learning on a particular concept, it doesn't just float free in your brain, in your memory. It's always linked to something that you already know. So in terms of deep analysis, thinking, making connections, that is what learning is in a very simple form. So the more you think about something, the more connections you make, the better you're learning. Because every time you travel down that path and you think 999 and you think ambulance, fire service and all of those kinds of things, that embeds it in your memory. I would challenge anybody who currently lives in the UK or has lived in the UK for any length of time to forget the number 999. It is all embedded in your memory really, really deeply. And this is about the connections that you make. The cognitive architecture that you have in your brain will be individual to you. This is called a schema. Now, it might be that, you know, this is your image of what a schema looks like, but in reality, it's probably much, much more complex than that. And all of the different connections between the information are like paths. You know, you might have a couple of sheep tracks, you might have a motorway. It's thinking about how often do you travel down those paths, how well worn are they? Because the more well worn they are, the more the greater the number of pathways you have from any single piece of learning, the better able you are to remember that, the more durable the memory trace. So when we're thinking about things that you have learnt, they're described by cognitive scientists as a memory trace. So we want really, really durable memory traces for all of the learning that we're teaching pupils in school, because we want them not only to retain that learning for their lifetime, so to be able to talk about things that they learned in school with a real clear understanding and a clear link with all of the connections that they have, but we also want them to be able to recall that learning when they need it. So there are two clear tasks that need to be developed in learners when you're giving them to be learnt information, new learning, is you want them to make connections and practice making connections, but you also want them to practice recalling that information, to practice retrieving that information, because it doesn't matter how effectively it's stored, if you can't call it to mind when you need it, what use is it? So those are the two things, the two types of learning strategies that we would want. But what tasks actually help that happen? What are the learning tasks that encourage that deep thinking? And that deep thinking is about connection and it's about recall. Well, on the original sketch note, we had 6 different types of deep thinking tasks. And we're just going to look at 2 of them today. So the first one, pre-existing knowledge links. And when I finish talking about this, I'm going to ask you to give some ideas about how you might do this in your classroom. So as I'm talking, be thinking about, well, how does that connect with what I do in my classroom? So that might be something like create a list of everything you know about. So if I was teaching, for example, I was teaching a Shakespeare play, I might say, write down everything you know about Shakespeare. And then you're starting to think of things like it's got archaic language, it happened in England, we've got the Globe Theatre, we know that it's to do with the human condition, all of these different things are coming up. I might also ask people to say, well, what links with this particular concept or this particular idea? So I want you to have a think about now, how do you help pupils make connections or make links? When you've thought of something or you know that you do it in your classroom, just add it to the chat box. Let's have a look and see how you make links. Okay, so we've got starter activities, activating prior knowledge. Thank you, Darcy. Okay, what was learned the previous lesson? Absolutely. If you know that you're in a series of lessons that you're going to be doing something today that links with last time, we've got Emily's talking about 5 starters, Alma uses quizzes, Tavian uses a brainstorm, a brain dump. That's a really common thing. I like that, Emily. Previous lesson last week, last term, last year, fantastic. Knowledge dump. Deepening thinking questions. That's interesting. So tell me more about something that you already have mentioned. Okay, so we've got lots of examples of the types of things that make connections. So explicitly making those links, those are one of the ways in which deep thinking actually makes an impact on learners. And it might be that you actually want to say, can you tell me something that you think doesn't link with this concept? Why doesn't it link? Because actually those are really effective, because you have to think, you know, it's like 7 steps from Kevin Bacon. It's thinking about how you wouldn't get from one to the other. That's a really difficult task to have to think about, and one well worth trying. So let's have another think about another part of deep learning. Reworking. Okay, reworking something, putting it in a different format. I want to talk to you first about reworking by drawing a picture of. You will have noticed that all of the slides that we have shown you so far have included a visual. And one of the reasons that we do that is that it is a really effective way of creating connections, of making those connections really deeply embedded and thinking deeply about something. I want to give you an example. So if I asked you now to think about a blue baboon, or draw me a picture of a blue baboon, okay, and I want you to actually imagine that you're going to do that. Okay, and you can if you want. If you want to take your pencil and draw me a picture of a blue baboon, that's great. Okay, so the first thing that you do when you think of that process is you will start to think about blue baboon. So you start to think baboon. Okay, is that the same as a gibbon? Is it slightly different? Have they got the long arms, the big jaw? It's not a monkey, it's not a macaque, it's not as small as that. So you start to sift through all of your different connections that you have and start to narrow down, start to identify significance. Okay, so the first thing that you do is you just generally are thinking about everything you know about those things. So you're pulling forward connections in your brain. The next thing that you would do is you'd create a mental image. And I'm sure you all have now a mental image of some form of primate, blue primate. I wonder what blue you've got. Are you deep blue, royal blue? Okay, some form of primate in your mind. So you're creating a mental image to crystallize your thinking in your mind. The final thing that you would do is you'd actually take a pencil or a pen and you would draw or trace a picture of that on a piece of paper. Each of those processes creates what cognitive scientists call a memory trace. So just from drawing a picture of something, you've actually got a triple-barreled memory trace. And we know that the more connections you have with a single item, the deeper the learning that happens, the more effective, more embedded that learning is. I challenge you now to, a week from now, what one thing will you come up with from this? And I bet you anything, you'll all remember the blue baboon and the triple-barreled memory trace. So drawing a picture, it might seem really facile, but in fact, it's an incredibly effective process for deep thinking. So when pupils are thinking about a concept, draw me a picture of photosynthesis, draw me a picture of the storyline of a play, draw me a picture of that particular word. What does cognition mean to you? And when you're thinking of that, the memory and the cognitive processing that's required to turn maybe a word or a concept or an idea into a picture is actually quite significant. So something for you to try when you're thinking about developing learning with your learners. And it's the quality of the drawing, completely irrelevant. Doesn't matter whether it looks like whatever you've asked them to draw or not. If they can explain it to you, then the thinking, the learning has happened, because of course anything that happens on the paper is only ever a proxy for learning. The learning, unfortunately, happens inside people's heads and you can't see it happening. So all we can do is we can use tasks that develop learning for our pupils. Another way of reworking is to write a summary of. This is a much more common strategy, but reducing, and I can attest to this personally, reducing something of, say, I don't know, 1,000 words down to 50 words, or maybe even less than that. You may be aware of the fact that we're on Twitter when it was 140 characters, reducing the salient points of a 150 word research document down to 140 characters. That really does take some thinking about. So super short summaries, really effective way of developing pupils' thinking on a particular subject or item. So this is for you again now. Have a think about it. How could you rework a concept, an idea, a piece of learning in your own subject? Have a think about it. When you've got an idea that's something that you use, stick it in the chat. Okay, the Freya model, Rachel, that's a really excellent way of doing it. And in fact, in a Freya model, you can have multiple different types of ways of encouraging deep learning. A picture can be one of them, a definition can be another, use it in a sentence can be a third. In maths, it would be really effective, Sevda, if you think about a question in maths, a numerical reasoning question, actually drawing a picture of the process encourages pupils to actually think about the different steps that it takes to get through the numerical reasoning process. Draw me a picture of what multiplication is. That you think multiplication is a simple concept, but it allows you to actually identify misconceptions. So we're thinking about developing cognition here. Okay, nicely getting pupils to draw processes. Alex, fantastic. Yes, I Harrod. Tweeting, how would you tweet this idea? Yep, super short summaries, I love those. A newsflash summary, needing to sum up in learning in 2 minutes. Yes, because they really have to think hard and fast, and the focus is fantastic. In science, looking at it from a different angle, swapping the equation around, looking at it from different, so speed, distance, or time. That's a really interesting, and talking it through. That's a really good way. Sorry, AT, I don't know your name. Johnston's triangle for chemistry and science. Okay, different. Maeve, I'm not sure about my science knowledge is good enough for that, but you've got macro, sub-micro, symbolic. Yeah, okay, a nice way to, I suppose it's similar to looking at things from a different angle. Okay, so we've got lots of ideas for how reworking might work. So we've got 2 strategies that we could use. In the original research, they identify 6 different strategies. Elaborative encoding, which is starting to think about defining things, giving the definition of things, making sure that you understand what something actually is and what it isn't. So we've got exploring distinctiveness. Okay, so you could have comparison, something that happens in English all the time. What's really interesting is these 6 strategies, most of them will not be new to you. Most of them, you will use them all of the time. What is interesting for you to think about is how often do you use each one? Are there any others that you can use? And focusing in on, well, I am using this because there's lots of research that shows that learners are not particularly effective at understanding their own learning process unless they have an understanding of how it actually works, and that is explicitly taught to them. So if you are using some of these strategies, it would be sensible and effective to actually share them with pupils and explain why you're using them and what it does for them cognitively, because they are far more likely then to use them themselves in their own learning when they are apart from you. And that's what we want, that they actually become far more independent, and they're choosing to use, for example, a quick concept map before they answer a long question in a GCSE or an examination. You want them to be using these strategies as a matter of course. So in terms of your own CPD, the next steps for you, the first thing that you might want to do is, if you were doing this with colleagues or if you're doing it on your own, is actually to go through using the original sketch notes. So you've got a clear description of each of those 6 types of strategies, in front of you, is to make lists of strategies, tools, activities that you use against each of those six ways. And you might want to trial some of those in your home learning or when you're back in school, and get feedback from your learners. Which ones did you like? Which ones did you find more difficult? Which ones were more effective? And start to refine your use of them. You might also want to go back and read the original research, which obviously will be in your pack. The original research by Craig and Lockhart was on the depth of processing. So that might be something that you want to go and have a look at. And you might also want to go and look at the original sketch note from which we've taken this webinar and think about where to go next. And of course, for those of you who aren't aware of it already, on our website, and the website address is there are lots of other professional learning packs that you can access when you become a member. There are multiple levels of membership. We've got, on the left-hand side there, we've got professional learning packs which take you through resources, strategies, tools, classroom resources, and all those kinds of things. And each of these professional learning packs are on a single concept, but there's probably about 6 months of work on each one, because cognitive load theory, for example, covers everything that you would do in a school as a teacher. So there's a lot of work in each one. So you've probably got about 4 or 5 years worth of support resources there for you to have a look at. We also obviously do Curriculum for Wales resources, but we're also in the process of uploading all of our Research Bites webinars, both the recording of the session and the resources that go with it, because our paid content, the resources that go with it are as in-depth as the actual webinar. We're at the moment, I think we've uploaded lessons from China, but the other two, long-term planning, effective video learning, we've also got a purposeful blended learning cycle, which are going to be uploaded in the next few weeks. But obviously, we also do this for schools. So if this is something that you've enjoyed and you think that your colleagues would find it interesting as well, then please do feel free to contact us. We have got another, right, that's from a previous one. We'll move swiftly on. I didn't take that slide out, my mistake, I do apologise. We've got our next learning webinar, Research Bites webinar, is on Thursday. The one tomorrow is now sold out, but on Thursday we have our blended learning, creating a long-term plan. So if you're interested in that, tickets are now on sale. Please do go and access that. I'm going to turn my camera back on now and just ask if there are any questions. Please do pop them in the chat. It's been a whistle-stop tour. If you do think of anything later, when the webinar is finished, then don't forget our email addresses are on the bottom there. Please do feel free to email us and ask those questions. But I'm more than happy to answer anything that comes up in the chat. A recording of the webinar. Yes, Jane has recorded the webinar and she will be including that in the pack. So when you get your Google Drive, you will be able to have a look at the recording, so you'll be able to use this again and share it with people. That's perfectly fine.
As soon as we've left the meeting now today, we should be able to access the recording, so I'll get that sent out to everybody now today. And also in the chat box, I've just put a link to a survey, which would be really grateful if you could just link, and it's going to disappear really quickly, so I have to put it back in before it's gone. If you could just let us know and give us some feedback on the session today, which will help us inform us of where we want to go with future topics and future ideas. So, but if you don't get a copy of the recording by the end of or first thing tomorrow, then let me know. Either check in your junk boxes, because some LAs don't seem to like our Impact Wales email address, but just double check where it is. Otherwise, I'll resend out to you in a different format. Okay, so there's the link there, and I'm just going to stop recording. But if you do have any questions, pop them in the chat box. We'll be here for a couple more minutes to pick up any sort of queries that you've got.